Today we're going to jump into the supply and demand dynamics of the copper sector, an industry that's gotten a ton of attention over the last couple of years for good reason. Lobo, I actually want to start with you. I hear two main perspectives on copper demand. I'm just going to put them both in front of you, and then I want to hear your perspective. The first is that heading into a world of renewable energy, heading into a world of artificial intelligence, and a world where copper mines have been starved of capital, we're going to head into a parabolic copper market, the likes of which we've never seen before. The counterpoint to that would be, well, that may be true. However, we're maybe heading into a globally coordinated recession, in which case copper demand will melt away and maybe stay flat for a couple more years. Now, those are very binary and extreme, but I just want to, let's start there. Give me your perspective, and then I'm going to pull on some threads with the panelists here.
Sure. All right. Well, I'm glad we started there because I've actually been getting pushback on the copper question. I'm very bullish on copper this year. Copper, by the way, is my top pick for 2025. By commodities. And I've been getting a lot of pushback from people saying, oh, well, it's all the AI craze and it's all electric cars and these are fads and they're going to fade, and then copper, there's going to be no demand for copper. So I think this is really important because I'm not sure where this comes from, but this is out there. And remember, it was called Dr. Copper long before any of this stuff came along. This is an essential, I mean, we talk about critical minerals and all these fad words these days, but this was essential for decades. I mean, people are saying it's the new oil. It's not really new. It's copper, for crying out loud. It goes into everything. Bob Bishop is nodding, so I'm happy. So in one way, you can just kind of set this whole question aside. You know, how much EV demand will there be? I don't care. Copper demand's going up even without it. How much will AI turbocharge it? I don't care. Copper demand is going up anyway, and unlike oil, it's supply constrained. So the way I look at it is, you know, I'm just a due diligence guy. I get paid to kick rocks. But if the demand is set for decades to go like that, who cares what the tailwinds do or don't add to that? In a supply constraint, higher demand, I'm just extremely bullish. And the reason why copper is my top pick for this year is that unlike, say, gold, which is flirting with nominal all-time highs, copper is relatively cheap. I think of my favorites, gold, silver, uranium, copper. Copper is the relatively cheaper one, and that gives it more alpha. That's my take.
Yeah, I was going to ask why copper being the top commodity pick, and you just answered it for me there. So when you say the demand is so reliable, I was trying to figure this out myself recently, and I found myself studying like 50 years of copper demand. And the reason I did that was because all of these events that may or may not happen, technological revolutions or massive depressions, those things all happened in the last 50 years. Yet, decade over decade, 1970, 1980, 1990, we very consistently added about 3 to 4 million metric tons per decade. Yes, volatility along the way, but decade over decade average has been like almost a straight line. And we saw, the advent of the internet, personal computer, smart tech, all of it. We also saw massive recessions, but that demand curve was consistent. Do you look at the historic track record, or what gives you that confidence in the demand curve?
Well, to be perfectly honest, again, I kick rocks. So I look at the Wood Mackenzie's of the world and their projections, okay. And basically everybody I trust, they all are looking at this increase, and that's good enough for me. And then I look at how difficult it is for people like this guy, to get projects permitted and so on. And I just, these big copper mines, the ones that matter, it's not like some little high-grade gold mine that can make a difference. These things are huge, and they're getting harder and harder to permit everywhere in the world. So this is one where, maybe the game has changed. This supply that you've talked about, that was in a world where permitting was easier. And in the future, maybe it won't get so bad as I'm afraid, but I don't see it getting better. And sorry, just to your first question, that recession concern, don't forget the money helicopters. Fiscal dominance, as Lynn Alden says, or global liquidity, as Michael Howell says. The money helicopters are there, and I see the global weakness. I get the question, but I think we're in for more inflation, and that's bullish for all commodities, including copper.
Okay, we're going to keep lengthening the measuring stick and making everything else look bigger. Yeah, I'm with you there. Ivan, you're a serial entrepreneur in this business, not always in copper, but you're running a copper company today. So I could maybe guess your top choice of commodity is the same as Lobo's. But walk me through your thesis, the rest of this decade, copper, please.
Yeah, so, great point with the EV. The EV thing is new, and the amount of copper used is much more aggressive, I think, than computers and electronics in the cars. But construction's huge. And in the early 80s, population was around sub 4 billion people on the planet. We're now pushing 8 billion people. So just think about that development curve and how much that has changed. The EV thing is one thing, but mining construction is huge. Where I live, there's houses being knocked down all the time. A lot of that baby boomer era, those houses are coming down, there's buildings going up. I've seen so many cranes around the world in the last while. So I just feel that we're on the cusp of a construction boom, subject to economy allowing that, helicopter money or what have you, to make that happen, inflation and whatnot. So I think we have Dr. Copper hasn't gone away. As much as we want to focus on EV, I think there's naturally a position there where there's going to be a lot of development that's going to draw a lot more copper. So I pick higher for the next decade. I'm looking for something that could be rich enough that would make money in any copper market, and it would be from surface. That's very, very, very difficult to do, but we've got an excellent shot at it. And so I think, you've got to be a realist to be bullish in copper. I certainly am, but you got to be an explorationist to look for the big ones, and that I am as well.
Okay, thank you, Ivan. And Rick, similar question to you. Health of the copper market today, and what's your expectation?
I think maybe something before that is important to talk about. That's from a speculator's viewpoint. There's a lot of copper mines, even 20 years ago, that made $1 million a day. These are big mines. You make big money with big mines. If you're going to take the risk that y'all are taking, big risks, you ought to make big money. What I've always liked about the copper business, and I haven't always had an opinion as to the direction of the copper price, but I didn't care much because I knew that a drill hole could put me on the path to a $5 billion company or a $10 billion company. So for most of my life, I've been relatively agnostic about commodities because I wasn't smart enough to know which way they were going to go. But I've made really good money in commodities that were unpopular at the time that the discovery was made. What I like about copper is that some of these copper deposits are mammoth. They make stupid amounts of money. In fact, some of the biggest gold mines in the world produce gold as a byproduct of copper. That's how big they are. So now I'll answer your question. Two things to consider. Demand. And I think these gentlemen have said it well. EVs, sure. Data centers, sure. There's 1 billion people on Earth who have no access to primary electricity. There's 2 billion people on Earth who have access to intermittent or unaffordable electricity. I would suggest to you that the boom 2000 to 2010 was mostly about the urbanization of China. We have the rest of the world to go. Going to take copper. Rebuilding Pacific Palisades, if you want to stick to the West. Going to take copper. But I think the bigger story is supply. I'll make fun of myself. I'm a metaphor for the copper industry. I'm 71 years of age, fat, bald, past my prime. And that's what the copper mines look like around the world. Bingham Canyon, 160, it's older than me. 160 years of age. Chuquicamata, 115 years of age. El Teniente, 100 years of age. Even the youngsters, like Escondida, 45. We need to be finding and permitting a lot more copper mines. To change production tomorrow, we needed to start 25 years ago. And we didn't. And when we found it, one deposit, Resolution, wonderful deposit. 1 billion tons of ore in a great place between 3 copper mines, towns, roads, highways, everything. By the way, 1.5% copper, 3 times the average mine grade worldwide, been stuck in permitting for 26 years. So not only do we have to find the stuff 25 years ago, we had to permit it 26 years ago. And we haven't found it yet. So, I mean, I think the supply side is, it's attractive to the point it's grotesque.
So, when I think about what's going to incentivize more discoveries, what's going to incentivize maybe permitting to actually move, usually it comes down to price. right? That moves things faster. Let me know if you agree with that or not. And my follow-up question, Rick, would be, in 2018, you were on this stage talking about uranium, and you said, and that year, uranium had hit a low of $17. And you said, look, guys, either the lights go out or the price goes up, and uranium's up 300% since then, right? So, you called the bottom there. Similar scenario in copper today?
No, copper, uranium then was hated.
Was hated. Okay,
And
good point.
As an investor, there's nothing that you should love more than hate.
Yeah.
Hate is just as good as it gets. People don't hate copper. In our business, the safest move in the world is from hated to tolerated. If you buy something that nobody wants, you buy it cheap.
Yeah.
Copper isn't cheap. You got to have a guy like Ivan who actually finds some. Forget about the narrative. Look for a team that can find copper. Or if you're buying real copper companies, look for companies that are in the lowest cost quartile worldwide, in the highest return on capital employed quartile worldwide, that have at least 10 years left so that they can survive until the good times come. In other words, use basic security analysis. Forget a little bit about the copper thesis and try and buy really good companies or really good exploration teams in the copper side and let the copper story take care of itself. Just obviate the company risk before you worry too much about the copper risk.
Ivan, what's your take on that? Because there's two problems that the copper supply is facing. One is undercapitalization leading to not enough discoveries, but the second, as Rick mentioned, is permitting the discoveries that we have sometimes. So, are those the two main obstacles, and how do we address those moving forward?
Yeah, well, first off, permitting is, Peru is some of the largest copper mines in the world exist in Peru. And if you ask me two phrases to describe Peru, major mines and major permitting challenges. Not that you can't get it done, but it takes a long time. These are major earth-moving events. If you find one, these are major holes in the grounds, and the social aspect is actually more important than the government aspect. So everyone's trying to take from all sides. We spent 9 years unlocking a social aspect to get access at drilling that big one that could potentially be Peru's next major one. So time's against us. As far as a lot of copper mines that exist, the low-grade copper, there's plenty of it out there. The amount of money that's going to be needed to bring these forward, the amount of time that's going to take, it's a very slow solution to a very big problem. So from a permitting perspective, it's not easy to permit a big hole in the ground, not in this day and age with ESG, so that's going to work in favor. And secondly, the time that it takes to bring these things on, there's no short-term supply to copper. Whereas if you find a very rich gold mine, you can get it up and running in a short period of time, and you can produce quite a few ounces of gold. Copper is a much, much bigger beast, and it has way more implementations than you normally would see in a precious metal deposit. So that's what makes the challenge of supply so much more compelling. And looking for it now, I want to say this, we spend a lot of money looking for these type of projects. The easy ones have been found. Any copper mine that's in an area that you could permit and mine it that's sticking out of the ground, it's been found. Nobody talks about discovery enough. Look at Filo Mining, that big discovery we all saw. That was 23 years later. That's a long time to make that discovery hole, right? So these big ones take time. They're so rare and they're so valuable when you get them, but in the market we're headed towards, it's going to be even more valuable. And that's why we took on the decade-long effort to go after something that could meet that kind of criteria.
Now, I want to pivot to diligence a little bit, and then maybe get into some M&A conversation. But first and foremost, this is an investor conference. Everybody here is curious about investing in these metals. Ivan, I'll stick with you for a minute. I want you to arm the audience with a couple pieces of counsel. If they're walking the floor, hearing from 6, 7 different copper companies, on the panel 1 hour ago, we said, let's set a personal goal, hit the show floor. Pick 10 booths. The first person that tells you about the company, you ask them right away, how many shares do you own? And just get used to asking that question. When it comes to the copper opportunities, Ivan, what could we share with the audience today? And the best way that we like to phrase this is, how do you get to the no? How do you get rid of the garbage opportunities that aren't worth your time so that you can find the gems that are?
I think that the biggest thing in a copper exploration company is capital. How much capital do you have, and what are you going to do with it next? That will answer a lot of what you just said. The first thing the market will do on an expensive copper story, because they are expensive, is they will take apart your capital. And they'll either discount you and wait to finance you and dilute you, or they'll buy you if you're well capitalized and you make that discovery. It's expensive to drill. It's expensive socially to impact the communities. Everything about copper is expensive, and that's where the reward is sure worthwhile. So my main thing would be ask the capital that they have or the line of sight on capital, and you can also look at share structure to see if they're in a financiable state with how many shares they have out. And third point you mentioned first was how much have they bought of their own stock in the last year? And that's something very critical. If they're not buying their shares of their company at cheap prices, why should you, right? Especially when they're in the pennies, and that's where a lot of these copper companies are.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you, Ivan. Lobo, I want to give you the same question. You know, we've got 700 investors out here right now in front of us. They're all looking for counsel on how to make smarter decisions and find those winners. What would you share with them today?
All right,
specific.
Well, we'll see if I get invited back next year. I have a very simple formula for you all that you can all remember. I call this Lobo's dictum. It's very simple. You ready? Write this down. Crap is crap. Crap at higher prices is still crap. Crap at lower prices is still crap. If you've got a copper project that's been known for decades and it's still in the ground and it's not held up by permitting, it's still in the ground because it wasn't economic. You say, oh, well, that was 70-cent copper. Now we have $4 copper, $4.14. It's economic now. Well, what was oil back then? What was steel back then? What were all your input costs back then? I'm not saying that there can never be an old project that has some new change. You know, maybe there's an extension. Maybe there was a permitting issue. So I'm not blanket saying that any known copper resource will never be going into production. But remember that formula. I know it's complicated, but it'll save you money. Crap is crap. And something that has been overlooked repeatedly, that was for a reason. Does that help?
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. And I actually love how you challenged the assumption that a copper project that's not economic at X price would be at that price. That's ignoring the fact that if the copper price is up 2X, probably a lot of the input costs are as well, correct?
Just so.
Okay. Rick, same question to you. Walking the show floor, talking to copper companies.
Those are two great answers. I would suggest that in the exploration phase, you want to deal with somebody who's been in the copper business before. You want to deal with somebody who knows what porphyry rock packages look like. You don't want necessarily just exploration experience. You want access to copper exploration experience. The experience that the team got their reputation on has to be relevant to the task at hand. But the second thing I think that people need to understand with regards to copper, there's lots of copper, as Ivan suggested, but size really matters. In the copper business, a porphyry is going to take you $5 billion or $6 billion or $10 billion to build. Size really, really, really matters. And on the floor, if you're talking about somebody who has, 3 holes into a so-so deposit, to ineloquently quote Lobo, crap is crap, the idea that you would take big risks for a small reward is silly. In the copper business, it really, really, really has to matter. So if you hear, this sort of story, the bootstrap story, like we're going to start with a small high-grade deposit and we're going to use the free cash flow to build BHP over 20 years with no dilution. From an entrepreneur's point of view, that's a seductive story, right? But it's a lie. If you're going to take big risk, you got to be shooting for big rewards.
If we take everything we've heard thus far at face value, that demand is predictable, supply is constrained because we haven't invested in it, we're going to see an increasing gap, right? That will lead to higher prices. Should that lead us to believe that we'll see hungrier majors who want to capitalize on that, more M&A, maybe more downstream investment? What's your take, Rick? I'll start with you and come back.
If you make a successful discovery, the majors are crazy. I get calls from them. Okay. They come as far down the feeding chain as me. What do you see that we can invest in that has a chance? These guys know.
These are the phone calls that you're getting.
That I'm getting.
Yeah, okay.
These guys have underinvested, and they know they've underinvested for 25 years. If you are lucky enough to make a profound copper discovery, you need to pretend that you're going to put it in production yourself. You don't need to worry about that. The Glencores will be there, the Tex will be there, the Rios will be there, the BHPs will be there, the Zijins will be there, and they'll be there like white on rice.
And in terms of consolidation among the majors, would you expect that at this stage or not so much?
I hope so.
Okay.
You know, I mean, nobody wants to be the guy who lost the merger. Everybody wants the other CEO's salary to disappear, not their own.
Right.
That's the chief constraint that you see among mergers. Everybody wants to win the merger, and that's not the way it works. But the idea that there's a discussion now between Rio and Glencore, as an example, is a real interesting circumstance. And as an industry, we need much less G&A. So the idea that you would have M&A that reduced G&A, if it occurred, would be an extremely good thing.
Ivan, same question to you. You've got representation from some of the biggest copper mines in the world on your board. Majors reaching down into earlier stage opportunities. What's your take right now?
Oh yeah, we had about 7 different majors pursue us for the 9 years we were waiting to get social access, and then it was a bidding war with 3 of them. And one of the 3, 2 members of their executive committee joined our team, the head of exploration from BHP and the lady who builds mines for BHP. His role was unique because he mapped Las Bambas, and we're drilling a Las Bambas analog, so he had good comfort with the region. But it was an extremely competitive environment, something I was shocked to see, and I certainly capitalized on when we raised almost $20 million last May. But I get to pick his brain often. He's an incredible addition to the board, and listening to somebody from that level, you get to hear about what Rick was referring to. Everyone's late, and that's how it works. You know, they can buy it if you find it, but there hasn't been much found lately, so it's a real problem that's developing. If you're producing and you're not replacing, you're going to get penalized. So producing and replacing is the challenge they have. We took on a huge system, 100,000 hectares that could have multiple big discoveries over multi-decades. That's something that appeals, that long-term look, that bigger look that Rick was talking about. That's the prize worth going for. It costs a bit more money, a lot more perseverance, and no issue there. But yeah, no, it's real. And you know, that move earlier on Rio Tinto, we saw it. You know, they try to go for it, and I think you're going to see a lot more of that. And it's becoming a very, very competitive world, not just between majors, but also with the Chinese. They're integrating into the Congo, they're integrating into South America. We're looking at other countries, they're in the governments, and they're trying to capture right of first offer of copper coming out at market price. So you have a real push going for that special industrial precious metal, as I'd call it, and that's where I see copper today.
Yeah, you know, we haven't heard a ton about the geopolitical angle in the copper sector, actually, but this is maybe the first comment today that we've heard about this. It absolutely makes sense, right? Strategic asset in short supply, in consistent demand. Any other power players making strategic moves like that? Lobo, I'll pass it to you next, or maybe just add some context, because you were nodding along there as Ivan was talking about the Chinese investment in a few African countries, et cetera.
Well, just real quick on the last point, I would point out that if crap is crap, so you need new projects, and if the M&A is happening at the top, you know, buying isn't building. So this isn't bringing any more copper into the world. This, not to give Ivan a freebie here, but I mean, the discoveries have to happen. This is not an if question, it's a when question, and the low-hanging fruit having been picked, you have to go farther afield.
You're saying producers buying each other doesn't actually increase the supply of anything.
Right,
yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Right? So somebody has to go out there and discover stuff. And so for the people that can actually do that, I think, you know, this isn't, I'm not going to mention any stocks or whatever, but if you can nail that, I think that's where the really big hockey sticks would be. That's an exciting prospect. On the geopolitics, you know, I kick rocks. I don't have a whole lot to say, you know, but the modern day Game of Thrones, if you will, this is not a gentleman's game. It's not about pure economics. It's also about global power and positioning. If you think that Putin and Xi are merely worried about, you know, corporate profits for their companies or something like that, I think you're not seeing the whole chessboard that they're dealing with out there. And I don't pretend to be able to read their minds or say much more there. But I'm just saying the world is a big, bad, dangerous place, and there's some big, bad, dangerous players out there. And it pays to be cautious in this environment. And personally, I'm willing, I always want a discount, but I'm willing to take a little bit less discount in a jurisdiction where I feel less likely to be plundered on the basis of geopolitics or local kleptocracy.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate that, Lobo. Ivan, I want to pass it back to you for the final word. I introduced you as a serial entrepreneur in this business. You built 2 companies that delivered massive value for shareholders. One was sold, one became a mine. You're building a copper company now. We've kind of laid the land a little bit in terms of, production and the necessity of exploration. Where does Copernico fit into this landscape? Take a couple minutes to walk the audience through what you're building and how you fit into the copper picture today.
Sure. We're a discovery-focused company, and when I say discovery, I want you to think as big as a top 10 copper mine in the world. That's what we're trying to find. I would do that, but that statement does it for me. But no, as far as that goes, I've been in the business for 25 years. As Jay said, I got lucky on a gold discovery and monetized a gold discovery again. But in the case of this one, it's been almost half my career chasing something big. I've drawn in some of the most intelligent people I could find in the business on the copper experienced executives from some of the largest copper producers in the world. I've got both sides of the chessboard, from internally from an explorer side, but I also have that leverage of that lens from a major mining company. Our first target is 7 kilometers long. We have 3 of them, almost similar caliber and scale, and we're finding more. This is an extremely prolific region in Peru, and it was protected because of volcanic cover. And if you couldn't see it, you couldn't find it, the old adage. And then also some social access issues that we've started solving. And that's been worth its weight in copper, I'll say, because I think copper is going to be worth a lot here. But we started drilling. We're on hole 14. And if you've come by our booth or heard my presentation, it's a skarn system. Also has potential for porphyries. Skarns are notoriously very valuable. They have generally very high grades. They're also very variable. And the big trick in skarn systems are figuring out where the temperature is of the rocks, where it was starting, and also the geometry. And right now we feel we're onto the geometry, so now we're just looking forward to seeing if we have the grade to go with it. But this is big. This is really big. It caught the top largest companies in the world, their attention. We have people on our team. We're funded to drill. We're funded into May of 26 next year, and we're on hole 14 of 35 holes that we're funded in drilling. So very exciting turning point in the project, and we think we might be catching the perfect copper wave as well as we go and drill.
Okay, I love it. Ivan, thank you so much. Rick, Lobo, thank you so much. Please give these guys a round of applause.